Hi, Scott Orlin with CINEMA-Magazin. The new film coming your way is called The Midnight Sky, and I am here with one of the stars of the film, Felicity Jones. Felicity, talk a little bit about how good of an astronaut do you think you would ever become?
I think I'd be a pretty hopeless astronaut, actually. I think I would have failed at the first round of tests. I would find it way too claustrophobic going up in one of those shuttles. I don't like to be away from home for too long periods. So I think on those counts, I would have made a pretty atrocious astronaut. But
What's
it's fun
interesting,
to interview one.
but as a viewer watching it, there's some cool things that you get to do, actually floating and moving from one compartment of the aircraft to the other. But you actually had to do that, and I presume wire work. How disconcerting or how cool was that?
Well, interestingly, because of being pregnant, by the sort of end of the prep period, a lot of the time I was mainly sitting on a very comfy chair, which made my stunt work one of the easiest films I'd ever done. So I had the luxury of looking at other people doing all the hard work. I did have one sequence where I was pulled up, climbing a ladder, going up and being pulled by a wire, but it was very smooth and quite gentle. So that was sort of the extent of the wire work for me.
You mentioned pregnancy. I mean, obviously, you sign on for the movie, you're very excited, and then you find out, blessedly, that you're going to have a baby. And instead of this, filmmaker saying, okay, we have to recast, they rewrote the script to accommodate that. What advantages do you think that element actually added to the story?
Well, it was a very instinctive process. And as you say, George was very open to adapting the screenplay and he actually felt like it brought so much more to the story. And that was after watching a week's worth of footage and obviously seeing me with the bump and thinking, actually, this is really bringing something to the story. And I think he said himself that he comes from a background in improvisation, and in improvisation you use what's there in front of you, you don't hide from anything. And so he was really embracing that way of working, and it felt as though it raised the stakes, and it helped, particularly for David and I, in our dynamic in our relationship. Suddenly we had this our child, and we were fighting for the life of this child, so it just made every decision have so much more weight that we were making in the story.
I want you to talk a little bit more about your director and co-star George Clooney, because I mean, having been on some of his sets, including this one, he's a very expeditious uh, director. He doesn't, take 15, 20 takes. He moves quickly. Is that reassuring to you? Do you feel confident?
Yeah, it's an interesting process. He expects you to have done a lot of the work at home. He likes you to come completely prepared, and I think that is from learned experience. He doesn't like sets to get too slow, because sometimes they slow down, and then everyone has lunch and everyone's really full after lunch. So then there's a lunch ends up being 3 hours, and then it's time to go, and you haven't got anything in the can. So from experience, he's learned to keep it moving, keep it sharp, and that actually you get the best out of people, and they're not getting too exhausted by the process. So I mean, every director has such different ways of working, and I found it a really interesting way to work, and it definitely brings something out of you, and it brings an immediacy to the performances.
A lot of times actors, especially in the pre-production, have to go through for costume fittings. There's a myriad of changes they have to go through. This basically, you wear one thing throughout the entire movie. Is that refreshing?
Yes, I had one thing, but I had multiple versions of the same thing, particularly as my bump was getting bigger. And they kept letting out the side of my jumpsuit, my space jumpsuit. And throughout filming, it was just getting wider and wider and wider and wider to accommodate the bump. But it does. I mean, it makes getting dressed in the morning easy, and it actually is so much easier than doing. Oh, gosh, the worst is corsets and bustles and all of that palaver. This was a pleasure. I was wearing sneakers the whole way through, which was a delight.
What type of cautionary tale do you think the story is? Obviously, it's a piece of entertainment, but we're living in such a volatile time.
I think it has even, I mean, just how relevant it is crazy when you're watching it. And each sequence, you think, gosh, this feels almost like documentary. I mean, it's making comments about the way we've been treating the environment. It is a wake up call in many ways. Which is, I feel, part of what we're going through has been a wake up call, hasn't it? It's almost felt like we've pressed pause on our lives, and in doing so, hopefully something good could come out of that, and some great changes in the way that we're living, and perhaps some of those changes may actually be for the best, particularly in terms of the environment. But the film is very much an exploration of what happens when things don't go as one expects, and we're very well versed in that at the moment.
Well, this interview went exactly as I expected. So, Felicity Jones, thank you so much. The film is called Midnight Syk, and this is Scott. Till next time.
Lovely. Thanks, Scott. All the best.